Debbie Leitch was born in 1995. She was born to parents Elaine Clark and Thomas Leitch. And Debbie had Down syndrome, and she also had some associated medical problems, so she needed full-time care. And she was, to be honest, completely dependent on her parents. Now, Clark, her mother, who was originally from Hastings, East Sussex, she actually had 3 other children. Now, Thomas and Clark split when Debbie was just 5 years of age. And it's at this point a decision was made that Debbie would go and live with her mother. That decision was made by social services. So this meant that Clark registered as a carer, and that also meant that she received benefits for looking after her. Now, the standard of care that Clark did provide her daughter had a lot to be desired. It really did. At the end of the day, there was so much left out in the care that it feels that Debbie wasn't getting any standard that she deserved. The child that we're talking about right now, as she's growing up, she's desperate for her mum to love her, and she has some complex needs, which makes her even more vulnerable and even more deserving of being acknowledged and treated with respect because of that. Any parent who wants to remain in a child's life is going to be a welcome one. They're going to be able to reduce stress, they're going to give you some time off, they're going to be a positive role model for your kids. Why would you not want that? The fact that she doesn't want to be with mum doesn't mean that she doesn't love her mother. She really did. She was devoted to her in many ways, but she clearly had a preference for her dad. Why did social services block the move? If it's not bad enough that Thomas isn't getting time with his daughter, Clark then moves her children in 2014 to Leeds. So obviously she's had the family breakdown, she's been on the child protection register, she's had the dysfunction as regards to the relationship with her dad because mum's been blocking it, and now she's moved to Leeds, which again is further change. But it does feel that when she moves to Leeds, it's really positive. She has a really full life, she's active, she attends a daycare centre, she gets involved in a whole range of activities. She even goes to college, she has lots of friends, and she has a boyfriend. She was thriving, and this was clearly a place where all the pieces of the jigsaw fitted into place for this young girl. And clearly, she would be in a point in time where things felt really good. All of this changes when Clark moves with Debbie and her siblings to Blackpool in 2016. Now, despite the fact that Clark was receiving enhanced benefits for Debbie and a £215 a week carer's allowance, it seems like the standard of care that she was providing her daughter just began to descend drastically into something that represented something incredibly neglectful. She began to completely neglect Debbie, and I'm going to be really honest, personally, when I look at what plays out that I'm going to talk to you about today, I do not feel that she had a shred of love or respect for her child. Her niece would actually later state that Debbie was rarely taken out by Clark and her then boyfriend, Robert Bruce. It's interesting, isn't it, when new men come on the scene, how attention and money can often, shall we say, get deflected from where it needs to go and instead be spent on the new couple. So at this point, Debbie would be left at home. She was never really given anything, and if she was given anything, it was an afterthought. She had no clothes that were her own personally, she had to wear her mother's. And if I were to sum up the way that Clark was around her, she was a very lazy, egocentric and selfish mother. She didn't care for her daughter's needs. The only needs that she was concerned about were her own and probably her partner's. She would buy herself new shoes, new bags, and that would be with the benefit money that she was supposed to be spending on caring for her children, which is reprehensible. And even though I appreciate that children don't need lots and lots of presents and gifts and clothes to feel loved, there is a certain element of that that's required. children do need to feel that sense of physical nurture as well as emotional nurture. And everything I've told you regarding how difficult Debbie's life starts to become, she loved her mother right until the end, unconditionally. That girl was pure love, and Clark exploited that, literally exploited her gorgeous Down syndrome daughter, who should have had a life that continued to be thriving as it was back in Leeds. By April 2018, so Debbie's GP sees her and notes that there's a really serious skin condition that developed and diagnosed her with Norwegian scabies. Now, you're probably not common with Norwegian scabies. It's a really nasty form of crusted scabies, which is an infestation that's characterized by these really thick crusts of skin, and they contain really large numbers of scabies, mites and eggs. So to put this in context, Norwegian scabies sufferers are often infected with over 1 million mites from this form of scabies. So the GP, who's understandably recognised this, refers her to the hospital, and she actually had to spend time in hospital for the treatment because it was that serious. You would imagine that Clark would be absolutely horrified because it's infectious, so you're going to want to make sure if there's other children around that they aren't going to be infected by scabies either. Secondly, you have a child with some more complex needs than is typical, and you would definitely think that this would lead to her going to follow-up appointments because it's essential, but she doesn't. She doesn't take her to go to the hospital for a follow-up appointment to make sure it's under control. By autumn 2018, we see that social services are again involved with Clark's family. When they visit Clark's place, they're absolutely stunned because it is squalid. Genuinely. The conditions there are dire. The place is really filthy, and that in itself is massive warning bells. Clark's niece actually said later it was like looking at something that was out of a horror movie. This is Debbie we're talking about. And her cousin is literally describing the scene as if it was something out of a horror movie. Debbie was in a really distressed state at this point, and again, what is she doing that is so upsetting? Well, she's calling out for her mum. Clark just ignores her. And this is actually in front of her family. And there's a million things that I can say about this, but the most obvious is it displays how little care she feels for this child. Yes, she's a young adult now, but she's her child, she's her baby, and she's just disinterested. Even when that girl is crying for her in agony, she doesn't care. She just lets her deal with her pain. The point is that this child is dying before her, and she's letting this happen. And she's letting this happen with an audience at this point. Now that Debbie's auntie and cousin have seen that the situation hasn't improved at all, they realise immediately that Debbie's life is at serious risk. There was a girl literally rotting away in a bedroom that was covered in feces and takeaway food, and the girl had horrific scabies all over her. Of course there would be some kind of horrible aroma, but somehow this GP on call comes to this conclusion. He checks Debbie and he says that her skin was dry and inflamed, but he didn't actually diagnose scabies. And if that isn't bad enough, he decided that there were no safeguarding concerns. No safeguarding concerns. Social services then call again on the 1st of August, this is 2019 again, and this time Clark is basically ready for them. So she's cleaned Debbie and she's tidied her room. I cannot imagine for 1 minute it did not stink to high heaven. Anybody who has left a place and allowed it to get covered in and takeaway food and all the festering that takes place there, it will take more than a clean and a tidy and some Febreze to make that space smell acceptable. In spite of the fact that this will have smelled awful, and that Debbie is looking really unwell. She's worryingly thin. For some reason, guess what? The social workers aren't concerned. This child, who is clearly known to social services, who have had family get in contact with them for fear of the way that she's being treated, and they can hear her crying in a room regularly, and they don't just go out of their way and see what's happening. Open the door. The final week of August 2019, partner of Clark's other daughter sees Debbie at the house. And at this point, she is in such a terrible state. I mean, she'd already lost weight, as I've told you, but now she's lost even more weight. And she was described as skin and bone. She was just lying on the floor, and that's likely because she genuinely did not have the strength to move. And again, there's this horrific, pungent stench coming from her room. Between January 2019 and August 2019, it's when the neglect is at its worst. Clark's boyfriend, Robert Bruce, is also living in the property. Now, it is incredible to me that what I've just explained to you is that Debbie was going through this systematic suffering when there were two adults there to witness it. On the 29th of August 2019, finally, emergency services receive a call from Clark. But at this point, they're told that Debbie's been very unwell for some time, and she says that she'd stopped eating and drinking, and then she'd just, gone to check on her. And apparently she was cold and unresponsive. And she tells them that Debbie is. When those paramedics arrive, it is absolutely harrowing. It's 10:40 p.m. They get to Clark's house at Garden Terrace, Blackpool, and they are absolutely appalled. The scene that greets them is straight out of a horror movie. First of all, Debbie's room just smells of. There's feces on a bed, on the floor. Debbie is completely emaciated. And I'm talking prisoner of war level emaciated. She's in a horrific physical state. Now, Clark claimed that her daughter had been since 8 p.m. that evening, and she just waited before calling 999. And when interviewed by the investigators, Clark goes on to just consistently deny that she's had any involvement in the death of her daughter. She gets on with this customary behaviour, just saying that there is actually no problem and that she doesn't know how this had happened. So this lying is constantly this attempt to reduce the responsibility for her daughter's death. She didn't feed Debbie, she didn't get her adequate medical attention, and there was absolutely a clear risk of death that had been pointed out to her by her own family. So she goes guilty on the gross negligence manslaughter in December 2021. And on the 24th of February 2022, 49-year-old Clark is sentenced by Judge Amanda Yip at Preston Crown Court. The judge said, "You are responsible for Debbie's. You were her mother. She lived with you." So ultimately she was sentenced to 9 years and 7 months for gross negligence manslaughter.